Anthony Joshua versus Dillian Whyte. I've made no secret about who I think is going to win this fight. I've mentioned it in previous videos, but I've yet to do a formal prediction up until now. So here we go. Both of these fighters are young and unbeaten, obviously, but they're both also inexperienced, unproven, and untested. So no matter who wins this fight, I won't be shocked or surprised. If Joshua beats Whyte, I won't be shocked. If Whyte beats Joshua, I won't be shocked, because we're dealing with two unknown quantities. But based on what I have seen and what I do know and who they've sparred and their psychological, or my interpretation of their psychological state going into this fight, I'm going to give my breakdown and my prediction, which is basically my view on what is the most likely outcome of the fight, to you guys. Now, I think that Anthony Joshua has got faster hands, faster feet. We know he's taller, obviously. I think he's more athletic. I think he's better coordinated. I think he's a better combination puncher. I think he's better defensively. He fought at a higher level in the amateurs. And as a professional, I think his opposition has been slightly better. Not that much better, but slightly. Now, over on Dillian Whyte's side, I think Dillian Whyte has got longer arms than Joshua. It appears to be anyway, even though he's a couple inches shorter. And I don't take much from their amateur fight, but one thing I did take from the fight was, again, the fact that it appeared as though Whyte had the longer arms, and because of that, he was able to beat Joshua to the jab, or win the jabbing war in that particular fight, and therefore control that fight. Now, obviously, Joshua has improved massively since then, and so has Whyte, although I don't think he's improved as dramatically as Joshua. So, given the fact that Joshua has improved that much, and the fact that I believe he's got faster hands and feet, even if Dillian Whyte does have longer arms, I'm not talking about longer reach here, people. I'm talking about arm length. Arm length and reach are two different measurements. I've been through this many times. If you don't know the difference, look it up. But even if Whyte does have longer arms than Joshua, Joshua's extra hand speed and foot speed and improved technique might be able to easily overcome any slight reach disadvantage that he may have. But be that as it may, I see that as a potential plus point for Dillian Whyte. Another potential plus point for Dillian Whyte is also the fact that he may not have fought at the level that Joshua fought at as an amateur, but as a professional, as far as I'm aware, Dillian Whyte has sparred a much higher level of fighter. This is a guy who's been in there with both Klitschko's, and he's been in multiple Klitschko camps and sparred Vladimir particularly numerous times. He sparred David Haye. He sparred Tyson Fury, who's now the unified heavyweight champion. He sparred David Price. He sparred Derek Chisora. And for the most part, from what I've heard, he's been doing pretty well in sparring against most of those guys. Yes, there has been those rumors of Whyte being dropped, but believe you me, people, if you found out how many of the top fighters in the world and throughout history got dropped and even knocked out in sparring by guys who on paper were not even fit to lace their boots, you'd be shocked. Trust me. A lot of top fighters get knocked out and dropped in sparring by people they're not supposed to be getting dropped and knocked out by. But there's an unwritten rule in boxing that what happens in sparring stays in sparring. And in fact, sometimes it's actually a written rule, because there are occasions where sparring partners are forced to sign confidentiality agreements where they're legally not allowed to speak about what takes place in sparring. So Whyte being dropped a few times in sparring, that doesn't alarm me that much, okay? Especially given the fact that he's been in there with people like Haye and Klitschko and all these other guys who haven't dropped him in sparring. You know, you look at professional boxing, it's the same. Lennox Lewis was knocked out by McCall and Rackman, but yet he beat people like Klitschko, Ray Mercer, Tommy Morrison, Frank Bruno, Shannon Briggs, David Tua, Andrew Gallotta, Vander Holyfield. He beat guys that were much better than the guys who knocked him out, and he beat many guys who were bigger punchers than the guys who knocked him out. So you can't read too much into that. Overall, like I said, I would say Dillian Whyte has had far better sparring, as far as I'm aware, than Joshua's had. Joshua has been into the Klitschko camp once, but other than that, I haven't heard about this guy sparring anyone particularly good as a professional. We know that he sparred Fury as an amateur when Fury was pro at the time, but Joshua was an amateur. And I believe he also sparred David Price when he was an amateur. But other than that, I haven't heard about any particularly high-level people that Joshua sparred so far as a professional, other than that one time against Klitschko. And maybe when he was in the Klitschko camp, he also sparred Kevin Johnson, who, was the same Kevin Johnson he knocked out just a few months later. So anyway, be that as it may, that's a plus point I see for Dillian Whyte. He must have learned something from sparring all those rounds with all those top fighters. He must have learned how to take care of himself. Yes, I know that he was wearing, him and his sparring partners were wearing 18, 20 ounce gloves and big headgear. I know that. But be that as it may, plenty of Klitschko sparring partners get knocked out. But according to Dillian Whyte, he's never been knocked out or seriously hurt by Klitschko. So he must have learned something about how to survive. So I am reading into that a little bit. The experience that he must have gained from sparring all those guys. Also, when it comes to the amateur fight, again, I say I don't take too much from it, but somebody asked me about the amateur fight. They said, do you think that the fact that Dillian Whyte beat Joshua in the amateurs will play on Joshua's mind psychologically? And my answer to that is this. I don't think it will play on Joshua's mind psychologically. I don't think it will play on his mind unless Dillian Whyte starts getting on top during the fight. If Dillian Whyte starts getting on top, then I think Joshua might start having flashbacks to their amateur fight. And if he starts having those flashbacks, that could be very detrimental to him, because it's important to keep your mindset positive during a fight, regardless of what's happening. So if he starts having negative flashbacks about getting beat by Whyte in the amateurs, that could be a problem for Anthony Joshua. But as I say, I think that will only happen if Whyte starts getting on top in the first place. So yeah, I've been through most of the stuff, but I also want to touch on the psychological state of both fighters going into this fight. Dillian Whyte feels like he's the underdog. He feels like everything and everyone is against him. One thing I find disturbing is the fact that his team don't seem that confident in him. To me, looking at the interviews with his trainer, Jonathan Banks, and Malik Scott, again, people are going to have different interpretations of the way they're behaving, but my particular interpretation is that Jonathan Banks is not that confident in Dillian Whyte winning this fight, and neither is Malik Scott, one of his chief sparring partners. And I find that disturbing. Again, that don't necessarily mean that he's going to lose the fight, because there have been plenty of occasions throughout the history of boxing, and which happen all the time in boxing, where a fighter goes into a fight and literally he's the only one that thinks he's going to win. Even his own team don't believe he's going to win. But yet he still goes in there and wins. At the end of the day, the only person who needs to be convinced of victory is the fighter themselves. So, that is what that is. But I have to ask myself, what are Jonathan Banks and Malik Scott and all these other Dillian Whyte team members seeing behind the scenes, which is leading them to have such little confidence in their man? Or my interpretation that they've got such little confidence. Because if you cross over to the Anthony Joshua side, his team are filled with supreme confidence. Whenever they're asked a direct question, how is your man going to win? Is he going to win? They don't even hesitate. They say, yep, he's going to win, definitely. But when you ask those questions of Team Whyte, Jonathan Banks particularly is very vague about what he thinks is going to happen in the fight. Very vague. Very vague about who he thinks is going to win. Malik Scott says he thinks Dillian Whyte's going to win, but looking at his body language, I'm not convinced that he believes what he's saying. And straight after saying that he thinks Whyte's going to win, he was saying, well, if Whyte doesn't win, I'd like to fight Anthony Joshua. So it does concern me what's been going on behind the scenes. What have they seen of Dillian Whyte behind the scenes in sparring and whatnot, which would lead to such a lack of confidence? And then you look at the fighters and other people who have been around both of them. Derek Chisora, for example, has sparred both. He sparred Joshua when Joshua was an amateur. They were both at the Finchley amateur gym. I'm not sure if they sparred more recently. I don't know, but I know when Joshua was still amateur, he definitely sparred Chisora quite a bit. And Chisora thinks that Joshua's going to knock Dillian Whyte out in the first round. That could be to do with the fact that Chisora's had beef with Whyte recently. They've had their back and forths on Twitter. Could be to do with that. Or maybe it's genuinely what Derek Chisora thinks based on the fact that he's sparred Dillian Whyte many, many times. And he's also sparred Joshua. I don't know. Also, James Ali Bashir, who is the assistant trainer of Vladimir Klitschko, he's seen Dillian Whyte in the Klitschko camp many times. And he's also seen Joshua in camp only once. And he thinks Joshua's going to win the fight early as well. So that is what that is. That makes you think about what are these people seeing in Dillian Whyte? And how is this all going to affect Dillian Whyte? The fact that it seems as though even the people around him don't believe he's going to win. To me, he seems like a mentally strong guy, but as mentally strong as he may be, surely that has got to have some type of effect on him. Maybe it will spur him on. But then again, maybe it will give him self-doubt and make him second-guess himself when he gets in the ring. It all remains to be seen. Now, in terms of tactics, just let me close this video out because it's gone on longer than I wanted. But in terms of tactics, Anthony Joshua's going to box, I think, the same way that he always boxes, which is primarily on the front foot. He's going to try and come forward, not rush forward, but he's going to try and come forward behind his jab, and he's going to look to expose weaknesses in Dillian Whyte's defense. He will lead off at times, particularly with his left hook when he sees the opportunity, but also with a counter right hand over Dillian Whyte's jab. And Dillian Whyte does leave that left hand dangling a lot of the time. I know he tries his little Philly shell from time to time, but I'm not sure how effective that really is. So Dillian Whyte's going to have to be very careful about that. So Joshua's going to come forward behind the jab, do what he always does, look to exploit defensive frailties in his opponent. And at the earliest opportunity, he's going to try and pin Dillian Whyte on the ropes and start unloading those combinations. And again, I'm not convinced that Joshua is necessarily a big one-punch knockout guy, but he's certainly got power. And with the accuracy and speed that he has, when he starts landing consistently, you're going to be in trouble. And I expect Dillian Whyte to be in trouble if Joshua manages to pin him on the ropes and unload the way that he unloaded on Kevin Johnson and all those other guys. So that's what Joshua's going to do, the same thing he's been doing. As far as Dillian Whyte, in my opinion, if him and his trainer are smart, they are going to look at fights like, for example, Ray Mercer against Lennox Lewis, or even Frank Bruno against Lennox Lewis, because those were fights where the shorter guy was able to come in early on in the fight, at least in the case of Bruno, with a tight defense and a good jab and have success against a taller, more athletically gifted opponent in Lennox Lewis. You know, Ray Mercer wasn't even in particularly good shape for that Lewis fight, but he kept his defense tight, he kept his chin down, he didn't try and get too ambitious early, same with Frank Bruno, and he just kept it nice and simple and kept that jab pumping out into Lewis's face. And if Dillian Whyte has the longer arms, as I suspect, I think he can be effective with that strategy. He's going to have to be defensively responsible and just try and gradually push Joshua back behind the jab. When he gets in close, bang to the body. But fight conservatively early on. Just minimize the amount of punishment he's taking. Minimize the mistakes. Don't even try and throw too many punches. Just walk Joshua down and keep him on the back foot if you can. If Joshua's coming forward, game over. If Joshua's pushing Dillian Whyte back to the ropes, game over. Whyte is not going to last long in my opinion. But if Whyte is able to keep that defense tight, like a Frank Bruno against Lewis, steadily walk forward, not necessarily rushing at Joshua, Derek Chisora style, bobbing and weaving, no, but just steadily walking forward, tight defense, jab to the head. Be careful about the jab to the body because Joshua's good with a counter right hand over the top. But definitely jab to the head, get inside, bang to the body, and try and plan to take Joshua into the later rounds. If this fight ends early, I think it's going to be Joshua knocking out Dillian Whyte. I don't see Dillian Whyte knocking Joshua out early. I mean, it wouldn't shock me, but in terms of probabilities, I think the overwhelming probability is if the fight ends early, it's going to be Joshua knocking out Whyte, not the other way around. I think Whyte's best hope is to put steady pressure on Joshua, take him into the later rounds where we'll see if those big bulky muscles that Joshua has fill up with lactic acid, and maybe Dillian Whyte can come into the fight. But the way I see it is Joshua has more options here. I don't necessarily think that Joshua will be a great back foot fighter. I saw him fight on the back foot in the amateurs, and he wasn't that great on the back foot, to be honest. He can fight there, but he seems far more comfortable coming forward. But be that as it may, I think he has faster feet than Dillian Whyte. And I think overall he's probably a bit more versatile because of the fact that he's so athletically gifted. I think he's better defensively as well. So I'm going to go for an Anthony Joshua victory. And I'm going to say that he's going to stop Dillian Whyte. It might even be a controversial stoppage, but I'm going to say he stops Dillian Whyte inside 8 rounds. Inside 8 rounds. I'm going to say he stops him. Possibly a controversial stoppage. Again, if Dillian Whyte wins, I won't be shocked because Joshua's unproven. We don't know how good he is yet. Won't be shocked at all. I just hope no matter what happens in this fight, that both fighters fight to the best of their ability and they therefore test each other so we can find out exactly how good both fighters are at this particular stage. I want them to test each other's chins and defenses and all that, test each other's hearts so we can actually find out some more about these guys. But yeah, my prediction is Anthony Joshua is going to win, and I'm saying by stoppage inside 8. I hope the fight goes to points, strangely enough. I really hope it goes to points. But given the fact that it's most likely that the referee is going to be on Joshua's side, and we've seen in Eddie Hearn fights before, in British fights in general, referees stepping in prematurely in favor of the house fighter, like the Froch Groves first fight. Given the fact that that has happened, I'm going to say that it's probably going to happen here as well. And the first opportunity that the referee gets to stop this fight early in Joshua's favor, I wouldn't be surprised if he takes it. And now, that being said, I don't know who the referee is going to be. So I might be saying something really horrible and disrespectful here without even realizing it. If it was Howard Foster or Ian John Lewis, then I would say it with confidence. But if it's not even one of those guys, then maybe I could potentially be disrespectful here, and that's not my intention. I just understand that there is politics in boxing. So that's what I'm going to go for anyway. Drop your comments below. Let me know who you're picking and how you see this fight going down, how you see the tactics for both guys. As I say, I think Dillian Whyte has to apply slow, steady pressure, try to minimize his mistakes, keep his defense tight, and take Joshua into the later rounds and try and win then. With Joshua, I think he has to establish himself early, capitalize on Dillian Whyte's mistakes, and make sure that he's the one going forward. And regardless who wins, I think we're going to see some fireworks. However long this fight, even if it lasts a round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, I'm sure we're going to see some fireworks. So that's my prediction for the fight, people. I'm taking Joshua to win the fight inside 8. I don't know why I'm tempted to change my prediction to a 12-round decision. I don't know why. No, I'm going to stick with Joshua winning. Could end early, but I don't know. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my behalf, thinking that the fight's going to go late. Maybe it's just wishful thinking because I love me a heavyweight fight, particularly a domestic grudge match between 2 unbeaten fighters. I love that type of scenario. So maybe I'm being way too optimistic and it's wishful thinking, imagining that this fight is going to go long. Well, let's see what happens anyway. Drop your comments in the comment section below. It's your boy Hatman. I'm out.